All right. I want to thank everyone who's in the room for joining us for this important conversation. And I want to thank everyone who is live streaming. So we are here to talk about employment after incarceration and employment when you have a record. So I want my esteemed panel to introduce themselves because they can do a much better job than I ever could. Malcolm, can I start with you?
My name is Malcolm Young. I've spent most of my professional life in criminal justice. About 2007 or 8, just as the recession hit, I became involved in working on issues with reentry, people coming out of prison, and how they were getting jobs or how difficult it was to get jobs in the height of the recession. In 2015, I had the opportunity to start a project called Project New Opportunity, which worked with people coming out of the federal system in certain locations in the country. We worked with these folks 6 months or more before their release. We stuck with them while they went through the release process, and afterwards, we tied them up with local community, family, social support, and resources, and we helped them with employment. That's my experience, and my takeaway from my experience is that we have tremendous problems in criminal justice with the number of people in prison. We have problems with finding people who are qualified for work in this country. Marry the problems together, and you get to some solutions.
Christopher.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Watler. I work for the Center for Employment Opportunities. Kind of started here in New York City and now in 21 cities around the country and growing. And CEO's mission is to help people with criminal convictions to find a job. And I joined CEO 2 years ago. I've been in the justice reform field for about 22 years now, and really interested and eager to engage in this conversation.
Jermaine.
Yeah. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jermaine Hudson. I'm a life skill educator at the Center for Employment Opportunities. I'm formerly incarcerated, and I was able to, get a full-time position at the Center for Employment Opportunities. I facilitate a 4-day workshop at the Center for Employment Opportunities. I'm a life skill educator, and I work with young adults between the ages of 18 and 25.
Is that me?
It's me.
We'll figure it out.
My name's Kevin Ring, and I'm president of FAM, formerly Families Against Mandatory Minimums. I've been there about 10 years. My background, I had been a staffer on Capitol Hill for a number of years, was involved in a political scandal. I ended up myself going to federal prison for a year and a half, and then came back to run FAM. During that time, I've been working mostly on criminal sentencing and prison reform, and I believe, as Malcolm does, that a lot of the challenges that we face in reducing recidivism involve people getting back and finding employment in their places of their homes. The people I served with were very nervous about leaving because they were afraid going back to communities where there weren't jobs and whether they were going to be able to be hired because of their criminal convictions. So this is a really timely conversation as I think more and more people get interested in the topic of prison reform and reducing recidivism.
Esta.
My name is Esther Bigler, and I am the head of the Labor and Employment Law Program at the Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations. We have a criminal justice and employment initiative where we've been working since 2008 on issues involving increasing employment opportunities for people with a criminal record. We are the remedy in a Title VII class action lawsuit involving census discriminating against people who may have had a criminal record, where we are educating people in 49 states, Puerto Rico, and DC about what's on their record, how to clean their record, how to get a certificate if that's what they need to be able to get a job, how to talk to an employer about their record. And then we expanded, and we've now been teaching in Queensborough Correctional Facility, people who will be getting out between 60 and 120 days, educating them about what's on their record, how to talk to an employer, how to clean that record if possible. And we've been working with employers on their misconceptions about people who have a criminal record. I'd like to add that only 30% of people actually are incarcerated, and so the issue is not only people re-entering into society, but people who have a record and are having tremendous difficulty finding employment at a time when we are at our lowest point in unemployment in 40 years, and employers are having a difficulty finding qualified employees. So this is really a very good time to really deal with this issue now, because it's a workforce issue as well as a justice and fairness issue.
And Esta, I think where you just left this is actually where I would love to start this conversation,
Okay.
which is talking about the scope of the problem. I think when people, especially people who are kind of coming to the conversation about criminal justice reform with fresh eyes, when you talk about issues of reentry, when you talk about issues of employment, they don't really understand the scope and the scale of the problem. A, why is this such a big deal? And B, as you said, the fact that there are people who are in the community who have been trying for years to find employment. So could you just give us an idea of what the scope of this issue is and how difficult it is to find employment with a record?
Well, first of all, 70 million people in our country have a criminal record, which makes it a massive issue on its own. Because of mass incarceration and the drug laws, so many young people were incarcerated or had a criminal record. We incarcerate more people than any other Western democracy, and probably even other democracies as well. And so that's the scope. We also know that it has a racial component. We know that African Americans are more likely to be arrested and incarcerated than whites, 6 to 1, and with Latinos, it's 2.5 to 1. So that gives you an idea of the scope of the issue. Also the fact that it is involved with racial stereotypes, and so that's a piece of the pie as well. We cannot leave the racial issue out.
Right. So I'm wondering, Jermaine, Kevin, if you can talk a little bit about what that looks like on the ground, what it's like to actually be around people who are living that challenge, to live that challenge of finding employment. Mike. Yeah.
My personal experience.
Kevin, why don't you start, and can we get a sound check on the mic?
Well, for a lot of people, you know, we talk about second chances, but some of these people came from communities where they didn't have much of a first chance. Mm-hmm. They came from homes where, you know, they didn't see, I mean, their parents might have been working or they might have been split up. They come from extreme poverty. And so the challenge is, you know, when you go to prison for a long period of time, whatever job skills you had atrophy, but some people go to prison with no job skills at all. And the problem is, even though we have a literally captive audience when you're in prison, we do very little in terms of programming and preparing people for when they come home. And so it's really, people don't have to have any compassion about this. It can be purely self-interest. 95% of all people who go to prison are going to come home someday. We have about 700,000 prisoners who leave prisons every year. And with the recidivism rate as high as it is, it's in our interest to make sure that when they come back, their life is better. And a key component of that is being able to find a job and supporting their family and not being lured into the ways that got them in trouble in the first place. So even if you don't have to have any compassion on this issue, it'd be nice if people did. But the problem for people is they may not have any job skills. That's why, I mean, organizations like CEO are so important, is because it's not, when people think about coming back, they think about, you know, is it a skill set? A lot of people in prison come out, they don't know how to get to work. They don't have any muscle memory about, you know, making a resume, getting to a job on time, taking the bus or the train to get there. And so there's some real basic skills that need to be taught.
Jermaine.
Yes, I'd like to add to that. So my personal experience with, you know,
Just try and hold your mic up a little more.
my personal experience with making that transition, you know, from incarceration back into society, there's so many, you know, layers that someone will be faced with. And from my personal experience dealing with, you know, parole and supervision, community supervision, and understanding that, you know, a person that's making that transition, they have issues such as curfew. You know, they have to be in the house at a particular time. They also have counseling programs that they have to go to, you know, anger management, substance abuse counseling. And they have to juggle all of these things with employment. And we have to keep in mind that an individual making this transition is dealing with a trauma. They're making the switch from incarceration to society. So it's so much that's, you know, on top of this person, and there's so much that they have to deal with. And sometimes that can be something that's, you know, not easy to manage. And they have programs like CEO, and CEO helps with making those transitions, giving the supportive services that a person may need. And little skills, certain skills that we may overlook, such as, social skills. Like you said, Kev, building resumes, being able to interview well on job interviews. These are things that's overlooked, and these are things that we have to look into and understand that a person that's formerly incarcerated may be lacking these certain skills, but with the proper support and the proper training, they can overcome these obstacles.
Yeah.
Can
Yeah,
I just
absolutely.
add to that? Because I think both Kevin and Jermaine are kind of charting for us, what the challenges look like, when you are reentering society. And so when you think about someone who's formerly incarcerated, what comes to mind? But if I were to say to you, think about a soldier returning from a theater of war, right? Your attitude and values might shift. Those two groups face the same kinds of challenges. When soldiers talk about post-traumatic stress or moving from a war theater to come back home, needing to reconnect with family, to find a job outside of the military, establish new routines, housing may be an issue, for someone returning from overseas. So, rightly, for men and women who serve the country, we've created programs and are working to get them mental health services and other services, not just because that's the moral right thing to do, but also because it's the cost-effective thing to do, and to have businesses line up, Chase Bank, other major corporations, saying, we want to hire you. And what we need is the same kind of an approach for men and women leaving prison, many of whom are eager to work, need a little help when they come out, also are working to reconnect with their families. 52% of CEO's population are parents. Half of all people who are arrested in New York State were arrested at home where they have minor children. So we need to recognize that the investments that we make in people, getting them to work, getting them job training, getting them kind of started, that's a great investment for us. And our businesses in the state, in CEO, just in New York City, we work with over 200 employers. And those employers are coming back to us time and time again because we're meeting a need for them. And so, think about those two populations, men and women who serve the country in the military, men and women who are coming out of prison. They have the very same needs, require the same level of support. We're doing it for our veterans because it makes absolute sense. It's the right thing to do, it's cost effective, it's the right thing to do also for people leaving prison, and is incredibly cost effective. We should not be spending $85 billion a year locking people up in our states. We should really be focusing that money on helping people to become productive members of their community.
Esta, I know you want to weigh in on this, but I want to let Malcolm also.
Well, I'd like to emphasize the positive side of this, which we've already touched on. First of all, what impressed me about the people we worked with was the motivation that they had. First of all. Second of all, our approach to people coming out of prison and people who've been in the system is to be very individual. 40% of the people who came to us for assistance actually thought they had jobs when they came out of prison. So they didn't need, if they might need the arrangements firmed up and confirmed, but they didn't really need help getting a job. But a lot of those people, 20% of our folks, had no place to go, no place to live when they came out. A lot of them have post-traumatic stress and have trouble dealing with people in a public setting as a result. If those issues were dealt with, they did become dedicated, hardworking employees. The promotion rates for some of the people that we worked with was astounding. One fellow who came out, and a month later he was a manager in an organization that he went to work for. The motivation is there, the drive is there, there are real issues to deal with, but these are good folks to look at for employment.
Esta.
Two things. One, in teaching at Queensborough, one of the things that struck our team that goes out every other week is how smart everybody is. They ask amazing questions. I teach college students at Cornell, and I can tell you that the people that I've been teaching at Queensborough are inquisitive, they're intelligent, they really want to learn, and they take notes. They take better notes than my students do otherwise. So that's the first point. Not only do they want a job and are they committed and they want to be good workers, but they're really smart. The other is when you mentioned children in the home. I just wanted to add another dynamic, and that is we know that the children of incarcerated people lose 2 years in terms of educational attainment. And so this becomes a major issue in terms of our next workforce development. We want to make sure that those children catch up. We want to make sure that those children also become part of society and get good jobs. So there are lots of issues there in terms of why this is good for society, as well as good for employers to get the best possible employees. The other piece, I don't know how many of you are from New York State, but New York State spends approximately $62,000 a year to incarcerate one human being. I would rather see that person paying taxes, having that person go to our wonderful stores in New York and buying goods and services. So it's in all of our interests in terms of taking people who will be great employees and hiring them.
So I want to talk about the employers for a second. I think this is a pretty critical component, and it seems that they are the folks with a lot of the power in this situation. Obviously, there is the will on the part of folks who have records to work, to get back to work. Obviously, there is a demand. As you mentioned, we're at one of our lowest unemployment rates in recent history, so there are jobs that need to be filled. So what exactly is the hesitation, if we had to pinpoint it, on the part of employers? Or what is the rationale that they are using for not filling these jobs with people who have records? Christopher, can I start with you?
Yeah, we work primarily with small and medium-sized employers. And so in our model at CEO, what we do is we are providing immediate transitional work on our crews. So we're hiring people when they come out, and they're working for us, and we're giving them job coaching services and really working to reduce the barriers so that we get them ready for work. So employers come to us because they know that we've road tested, our participants to get them ready for work. I think a couple of things. I'm always reminded that employers, when they're hiring, they're trying to do two things, right? They're trying to mitigate risk and, kind of find the right person, but also reduce costs, right? So mitigating risk and reducing costs are very important for employers when they're hiring. Unless you are in a large corporation, you don't have an HR department. And so, that's really important for them. So a program like CEO can serve as a real intermediary that helps them to meet those needs. But a couple of things are going on, right? Quite frankly, discrimination is a huge problem. What we know from research is that African Americans tend to be thought of as more crimiogenic by employers, even when they don't have a criminal record. Like that's a challenge. That discrimination is kind of just baked into the system already. And on top of that, having a felony conviction really presents a barrier to employment in certain fields. And so across the country, about a third of African Americans have a felony conviction. So if you're opening a business in a place like New York City or Buffalo, New York, where we have an office, there are large numbers of qualified employees, African American young men and women, who are ready to work, who could be employed, but are not getting employed. So unemployment rates tend to be double or triple for African Americans what it is for whites. So those are some huge challenges. And I think what progressive employers are realizing is, like, if I'm coming to a place like New York City and I'm having trouble finding folks, and then there are all these folks sitting on the sideline, I've got to do something about that. And for us, that's why employers like Action Carding and Fresh Direct, are so important. They realize the value of finding this pool of untapped talent. And when they're bringing those folks into their companies, those individuals are performing just as well or better than individuals that they hire from elsewhere. So we need to do a better job of really educating employers, helping them to understand the kind of risk element, and how to manage that. Unfortunately, there's lots of opportunities to do that. Again, our employers, we do that work. We educate them. We talk to them about the law. We talk to them about their specific needs and help them to understand how they can really benefit from hiring people who might be on probation or parole or have a criminal conviction.
Kevin, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think the barriers are just human nature. I'm sure when people heard Christopher talk about comparing the group of veterans to people coming out of prisons, there's a lot of people in this country who would say, don't even think about comparing these groups. These are heroes who served our country, and these are people who broke the law and hurt our communities. And so I think the problem is really, I always say this, but it's not our leaders, it's us. I think we're vengeful people, and I think when people get a chance to choose between somebody who hasn't broken the law and somebody who has, they're going to choose the person who hasn't broken the law. I don't think that's, I think that's somewhat normal, and these are things we need to sort of get people to think more deeply about. I'll say I think race is a huge component of it, but I also know that when I came out of prison and I had to do community service as part of my sentence, I was law school educated, my crime was a white-collar crime. I couldn't get a volunteer gig shelving books at the used bookstore because people just thought, well, we're not going to waste that time or that opportunity on you. That's human hearts we need to change on this. So I think most of this is cultural, and the law can follow, or the law can try to lead the culture. But I think for employers, what we're seeing is some are just diving in. Some are just seeing that this is the right thing to do, and they're changing their ways. They're opening their payrolls to people who have been incarcerated, even when the government's not prodding them to do that. But I just think sometimes we look for answers somewhere as if there's a policy or something that's happening, when in this situation, this is human nature working its will. And what we need to do is get people to think differently about the people who are coming back, more along the lines of what Christopher is saying. You should think about them, but recognize also we're not there yet.
Esta, I know you're itching to get in, and then I'll go to Malcolm.
There also is a couple of things. We've been training employers in retail and also in the nursing home industry. And what we've discovered is that there is a discomfort because it's the unknown. And they immediately go from someone was incarcerated or has a criminal record, they must have committed murder, or they must have raped somebody. And so we go from the parade of horribles immediately. And so part of what we've been doing is educating people about what a criminal record looks like, how to discuss a criminal record, because people are afraid to even have the conversation with someone. And most employers go through a real assessment of the person. And what we've been trying to explain to employers is the same kind of assessment. It's the same thing you do to look to see if this person matches and will do well in your particular job. One of the things we stress a lot is job relatedness, that if the person went to prison or has a criminal record for, I'll give you a great example, this woman worked in a department store and she stole using credit cards. She got involved in something. And she was given probation, she paid her money back, she went to school, she got an associate degree, and she got the certificate she needed to be able to ride on a bus with children who have disabilities. The Department of Education here refused to hire her. There was no job relatedness between what she had done. She had paid her debt to society and being on the bus, and it went to trial, and the judge ordered the Department of Education to hire her. So we try to educate employers so that they have the knowledge about how to evaluate someone. And they're doing it every day when you hire someone. So that's another piece of it. The other is negligent hiring fear. They're afraid that if something happens on the job, they're going to be sued. We did a study, and negligent hiring is negligible in terms of lawsuits. That's number one. Number two, in New York, we have a statute, 23A. If you go through that factor analysis, you've done your due diligence, and you really are prepared to deal if something has happened. But the reality is, most of those cases do not involve anyone who has a criminal record.
Yeah, Malcolm, I know you want to.
Yeah, I wanted to just come back to what Chris said for a minute, if I could, because we were talking in the back, and you left something out that I think is really important. The experience that I've had and observed around the country is with employers who go to try to work with people coming out of prison or who are in the system, not just because they have big hearts, but for selfish interest. And that's, with business, is an honest and good way to, that's how folks are motivated. So the connection is that businesses have around the country in different situations gone into prisons or worked with probation offices or worked with with jails or halfway houses to actually train people for their specific needs. what they want to have those folks doing. Training is a huge cost for business. Any way they can farm it out to community colleges or other agencies is a benefit to them. And it's possible to give the training agenda that you need, the program, to a corrections institution or an agency like CEO, have them do the training, maybe with your people, maybe with your equipment. You get to meet the folks they're training, and then you get your choice of hiring people from that pool that you've gotten to know and understand are actually pretty good people to work with. So CEO does this, and I thought that's what you left out.
I appreciate that. They got quickly kind of two things. One is we have a partnership with Action Carding, which is great. So Action actually pays us, and we send them ready to work individuals, essentially kind of tryouts. And they'll work with Action Carding for several weeks. A sanitation truck driver at Action might make $50,000 a year. Like, that's a game-changing salary for our participants. And so the ability to get trained and kind of work with a company that's really committed to them, that's usually important. For Action, it really it's very hard for them to hire. It's tough riding a 40,000-ton garbage truck, driving that around the city, or being a mechanic, or being on the back of that truck. And the second thing I'll mention is that there are all these new media companies and other companies that we need to get in the game here. We started a venture, apprenticeship program at Vice Media, where they hired 4 individuals from CEO. And it started off as a 6-month apprenticeship program. They paid above minimum wage with benefits for those 6 months. And they hired 4 of the 5 individuals who went through that program, all of them making on average $40,000 a year with benefits, right? And Vice was really committed to doing this, but didn't really know how to do it. And so what we were able to do with them was to really connect them to young people in our program. And half of our participants are 18 to 25 who knew Vice and watched their programming and were kind of interested in these jobs. But if not for this program, would never have known where to go, would never have known how to get in the door. And for Vice, what they got were these great employees that they got to check out, essentially, in the program. And they never committed to taking all of them. So it was surprising to us when they decided to really keep all of the individuals. But even if they had not, that experience would have opened doors for us. Our job developers would have been able to work with those participants to get equally exciting kind of jobs in the media sector. But I think those kinds of partnerships, I'd love to get banks involved. I'd love to get major law firms involved. I'd love to get other large media companies involved. These are the same young people that we are appropriating their culture, and you see it all around, hip-hop culture, and you see this stuff. These are the same young people. We should get them these jobs behind the scenes, production assistants and all these other jobs, because they have great career tracks. One of the young men in the program now wants to go to college, as a result of this, of this effort.
Great. I do want to let the audience know, everyone in the room, you'll have a chance to ask questions in just a few minutes. I have a couple more questions for our panel. So if you could start thinking now, my wonderful colleague is right over there, and she will bring the mic to you. So I do want to talk quickly about policy. I think for the past few years, Ban the Box has been a big conversation, and there's been a lot of confusion and discussion over the extent to which a policy like that is actually helpful. And Esta, I want to start with you. I just want to get the panel's opinions on the extent to which Ban the Box itself is helpful, and what types of policies may in fact be helpful in the realm of helping people with records find employment.
There's a question about, does everybody know what Ban the Box is? Ban the Box requires that where it is law, New York City, it's the law. There's about 150 different cities that require Ban the Box, and about 30 or so states that require Ban the Box. And they're all a little bit different, but what it says is that when I apply for a job, you cannot ask me in New York about my criminal history. You cannot have that little box on the application or ask me anything about it until a conditional offer of employment. And that is when you can go to the credit reporting agency and get my criminal record with my permission, by the way, and then you can make your decision about whether to formalize that conditional offer. If I have a criminal record, the requirement here is that you must discuss it with me, and I get a chance to explain I was 17 years old, I made a mistake, whatever the situation happens to be. The academic research on it shows that at the moment, it is not as successful as we had wished it would be. That is that often employers don't want to offer a conditional offer of employment if the person happens to be African American, because the assumption is that that person has a criminal record. So at this moment, whites with a criminal record and whites without a criminal record are benefiting from Ban the Box. We're about to undertake a study, I hope not too distant future, which we think using different criteria might show that it is working. But at this point in time, the academic research shows that it's not really helping as many people as we thought it would.
Are there any other dissenting opinions on that, or does everyone kind of agree that in theory it's good but hasn't? Malcolm, you're nodding.
Yeah, I agree. I have clients, and you can never tell a client, well, don't tell them about your criminal history, because we know very well some employers will check even though they're not allowed to, or they'll make an assumption. But the discussion around Ban the Box is what I think has been really important for businesses and people to hear what the real meaning of a criminal conviction is, which is, in this country, you may have a drug problem or a behavioral problem or a social problem or a problem with education or development. And so you got in trouble here, where in other countries you wouldn't have been in the criminal justice system. There's no reason not to hire people with those backgrounds if they dealt with them. So I think the discussion has been very, very beneficial.
Yeah, and it has led to companies doing this voluntarily. And the thing that's important about that is, if I don't check a box, but I have a 10-year gap in my resume, I've got a problem.
Yeah.
And in an age of Google, I don't feel like I have a lot of privacy anyway, so I think I'm being searched, and my Facebook page being looked at when I'm doing anything. Is certainly applying for a job. So there's going to always be limitations, but I agree that it's a sign of a culture shift. The fact that companies are doing this voluntarily says that they're open to the idea of hiring people, and I think that that's a good thing. So if that prompted the discussion, what happened first, I don't think it matters.
Jermaine, I saw you nodding a lot as Kevin was
Yeah,
talking.
because I remember a personal
You
experience.
just move your mic up.
I remember a personal experience, actually, going on a job interview and being able to, interview well and get the job. But it's like once the background check comes back, you're not qualified for the job. So the Ban the Box, it works up until a certain period, up until a certain point. Because, you're good enough, to interview, get the job, and start working, but as soon as we get the background check and we find out that you was formerly incarcerated, you're no longer good. So.
Esta, I know you want to respond, and then we'll go quickly to the audience.
One of the things I just want to make clear is that credit reporting agencies that do the background checks often have errors and mistakes on them. And so one of the things we want our students at Queensborough to know is exactly what's on that record, so that when it comes back and it has a mistake, and they very often do, they can correct the mistake, because that's really important to be able to talk about what your record actually is. The other piece of that is, so the credit reporting agency corrects it, and it's ABC company. Well, they correct their records. The other thousands of reporting agencies don't know that that correction was made. There's no requirement that it be corrected. So if that person then goes for a job someplace else and a different CRA is used, the error may still be there. So that the system makes it very difficult because of the inaccuracies of criminal records. And the FBI database is just as bad as the credit reporting agencies getting the information from the various states. So that's another issue that people really need to know what's on their record.
Yeah. Question right there.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Peggy Siegel. I'm curious, in terms of sort of expanding these efforts and expanding the effects of them. First of all, it's a two-sided piece. One is on the training piece. To these programs that you're running, I'm wondering if you run any of these programs where the group served is beyond formerly incarcerated, because it seems to me that might have sort of the benefits of expanding that workforce. You're sort of creating coworkers who now have a positive idea or might say, oh, my buddy could use this job kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the population served, expanding a training program like that beyond formerly incarcerated, and similarly, sort of from the employer side, the question is, are there sort of, in the same way, looking from the top, at the board of directors level, there's a real push to have more diversity on the boards and what the value is of that, the value to the company in terms of expanding how they view things. I'm wondering about sort of spillover effects in terms of positive value to employers that go beyond sort of having done this, if you will. I'm not sure I articulated that question super well.
I think we'll probably have to clarify that second part in a second, but I do want to start off with the question about training and kind of integrating training courses beyond just folks who have criminal records. Chris.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's, one of the big challenges is that the kind of training and workforce system doesn't really work well for people with criminal convictions. It works really well for incumbent workers, who are looking to shift or transition careers, but not so well for individuals with a criminal conviction. That said, I think it is interesting for employers to think about how they could integrate their training potentially. I think a lot of the work that we do with our participants, for example, involves strategies around cognitive change, soft skills development, and then some of our credentialing that we provide, whether it's the OSHA, general safety or food handler certification. Those certifications are provided broadly, to individuals. But I think for us, our mission, the challenge is how do we create change in this space where even among people who are poor and minority, who may have a hard time getting in the workforce, folks with criminal convictions are really at the lower end of that spectrum, and there's not a lot of attention, to that group.
All right, and I do want to quickly try to address the second part of your question, which was basically, are there spillover effects about the larger conversation related to diversity that could then affect hiring of people with records, correct? Okay.
Can I give an example of that? Because
sure.
What Vice did with their program is they publicized what they were doing. They worked with the governor's Work for Success program to actually host an event for businesses, which I thought was just terrific. Because in that way, what they were saying is not only we have made this commitment as a corporation, we want to encourage other employers to do the same. So I think employers can both think about internally, like diversity, for themselves, but I think being loud and proud about being a second chance employer, like really going out of the way to say, yeah, let's encourage other businesses. Action Carding has introduced us to other carding companies, and we got another carding company that's interested in doing the same thing. So the more that employers get energized and are seeing the benefits of this, I think there's a greater chance that they'll kind of speak up and encourage their peers to get in the game.
And I could stay up here and talk about this all day, but I do have to get you guys to lunch. So please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.